Welcome to our present state versus history on speaker. Here we are focused on the current events of our culture through the principles of our history, trying to make sense of the culture and the mindset of today. I am your host, Ray Mayfield. Well, here we are again on the pod. I've got Dr. Jake Hamby from Springfield, Missouri here. He's lived and worked in the Illinois area up around Chicago in the engineering field. Then he moved to the St. Louis area for a few years where he worked himself through dental school and moved to Wisconsin area and worked in dentistry before moving to the Springfield area where he's currently living and practicing dentistry. With his broad background of different regions of the U.S. living and working, it gives him a different perspective on our society than those of us who have been pretty much in the same area most of our lives. So today we're just going to have an open forum. We're going to see where this conversation goes and go from there. So Jake, tell these folks, hey.
Hey, how's everybody doing?
So tell me, Jake, with you moving all over the countryside like that, do you see a difference in the attitudes and personalities of people when it comes to the things of the United States government and where we are constitution-wise?
Yeah, I'd definitely say there's a difference depending on what region you're in, that's for sure, yeah.
Up and around St. Louis and Chicago area, what's their mindsets about our country? Are they Americans?
They are. You'll see. Yeah, you'll see a lot of people that, have your same viewpoints no matter where you live. I think one of the big things is, for Illinois, for instance, there's several people that vote red. I mean, you can see it even in the elections. Most of the counties surrounding Chicago area are red, and then you have the large, county or area of Chicago in the metropolitan area that, usually vote blue. So that's pretty much, I think, what turns that state blue. But there are several other people in the state of Illinois that, they're more conservative, red counties and whatnot.
That sounds like a lot of our states, state of Missouri, same way. We
Yeah.
got the big city areas, and it seems like they vote Democrat. And you get out here in the hills with us hillbillies, and they got good sense.
Yeah. Yeah, you see that. I mean, yeah, it's everywhere pretty much.
Well, what do you think about Putin and this move he's made here the last few days? You think he's on the right track, or do you think he's in for trouble?
I think he's on the right track if he's looking for war. Trying to start a war is what it seems like, really. He's basically, from what I gather, I'm not like an expert on the subject matter of Ukraine, but I know that he's wanted to take back that area for several years, and he actually took over Crimea, I think. This was like 10 years ago or something like that, and so I think he's just trying to move forward and probably just restore the old Russia, the motherland, basically.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Hard to say what the man's thinking in his head, but there's been a lot of conflict over there for a long time that our media doesn't seem to cover. I have a friend that is from that area, and there's been civil war on that border for a long time that's going on there, and I think that's the excuse he's using for moving in there now.
Yeah.
But anyway, we were talking earlier today about the Constitution and our forefathers and some of the thought processes they were having, and we were talking about these Supreme Court nominations and some of the things that they had discussed about what they were afraid of coming into our Supreme Court and those different things, and now it seems that we have them. What do you suppose the likelihood is of being able to correct some of the changes that's been made that's been harmful to our Constitution?
It's going to take a lot of work, basically, because the people that have changed a lot of the things that have occurred over the years, they just chipped away at it for years and years of time. So it's going to take, the other side to, try to chip away and just keep making these incremental changes in order to get back to what the founding fathers really meant for our country to be,
Yeah, the different viewpoints. But I've noticed in some of the readings that I've done with our forefathers that the things they set in motion for checks and balances were trying to be buffers for those viewpoints, so that irregardless of the different viewpoints that people brought into those offices, there would be checks and balances in place to safeguard against what we call it advocateness and different things like we're seeing in our Supreme Court today. We see a lot of that type of behavior that they were afraid of. Do you suppose there's any way that we're ever going to correct that?
I sure hope so. I'm hopeful.
You're hopeful.
I'm hopeful, but yeah, it's kind of, I don't know. I kind of have a longer viewpoint, I guess you could say, about the whole world and the history and the future of the world, basically. So I'm hopeful that it will change, and I would really, like for it to change and get back to the way the founding fathers meant for our country to be. But I think overall it's really God's plan, God's will. So as far as I know, America is not really listed in the Bible or like talked about in the Bible per se, but yeah, I know that China and Russia are, and
yeah. Yeah, and then it goes back and forth. We got folks out there that pick some scriptures and they try to attribute them to the United States, and then we got folks that say that they're not mentioned at all one way or the other, and a lot of that is argumentative because it's up to basically your interpretation of it. But one thing that I do know for sure, the scripture talks about in the last days, it says that all nations are going to turn against Israel whenever that point comes to be, and it describes the tribulation period, which is that window of time when all nations are going to turn against Israel, as a, should I say, more wicked time than ever has been or ever will be again. So that tells me it's going to be bad. And it tells me that no matter what happens, all the nations are going to be consumed within that. Whether the United States is a nation or whether they've been dissolved or whatever happens, we don't know.
Right. Yeah. Several years ago in my early 20s, I was really, really into, end time prophecy, things like that. And I read a book by Hal Lindsey, the late great Planet Earth, which he wrote that book back in the mid 70s. Yeah. And the things that he was saying were so relevant and like happening, and things that I could see had unfolded just the way that he described them. And that was back in, 98 when I read the book. And so, here I am, mid-40s, and just seeing, here we are, the world stage again. What do you know? China is trying to take over Taiwan, and Russia has already, invaded into Ukraine. And it's just causing, this tension, world tension, really. And, there's a lot of speculation whether or not China's going to just kind of sit back and watch how the world reacts to Russia and what they're doing. And then reacting and moving into Taiwan, which I do believe is probably going to happen. And, that book I was talking about, Late Great Planet Earth, that talks about, China and Russia, like I mentioned. The Bible does talk about the dragon and the bear from the north. And what do you know? Here we are looking at these two world powers trying to be more powerful than the U.S. They really hate the United States. And it's kind of weird that most of our products come from China now. I've never understood that, but that's another subject, I guess. But back in talking about my experience, I graduated with an engineering degree in plastics back in 2000. Could not find a job. Took me 6 months really to find a job, and that was up in Chicago, which I did not want to uproot my family and move away from all of our family, but had to, because that's the only job I could really get. And the reason why was because Bill Clinton at the time decided that, it was a good idea to send all of our manufacturing, or basically get all of our goods from China. So offshore, all the companies went over there because it was cheaper, the American dollar talks. Right. And so all these companies were, just making bank off of this cheap labor and selling products to us at pennies on the dollar. And then what do you know? What do you think China's going to do with all that money they're making now? Right. They're going to build up their economy. They're going to build up their army, you know. So exactly. So
yeah, right now their economy and our economy is a dead heat racing against each other.
Right, and you know that was done because of a Democratic president, and basically, you know, made that god awful decision to do that. I mean, prime examples during the middle of the shutdown and everything. You know, China was basically threatening to withhold sending the United States antibiotics and things like that they produce, which is absurd.
Yeah.
You know, it's absurd that we're even in that position of relying on a communist country to provide us with life-saving, medicines and things like that. So, really, all that stuff needs to be brought back to the U.S.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the awareness needs to be made. Because how many people out here in, you know, the normal working class folks do you suppose are aware of all these things that you just mentioned?
It's hard to say. I mean, but definitely gotta, you know, choose a lot wisely on which media outlet you get your information from. You got to do a lot of research, basically. weed out the bad stuff, and yeah.
Yeah. So. Well, I just read a deal just last week where Biden he's decided to take what was it, the terminology they used, a more apprehensive approach towards these deals with China and these foreign nations that have been stealing our intel and all these different things have been going on. The previous president that we had, he was pretty hard on him, and he had some things in place that were pretty well cutting that down to a nub and stopping it. And now this administration is looking at easing all that up and changing all that, and that sends a signal to me that he's not really looking out for us.
No, I mean, I don't have, you know, evidence, but there has been speculation that the Biden family's been paid by the Chinese for several years, millions and millions of dollars. So, you know, if China were to send a message to people, then that they should just let Russia do what they want and, you know, be kind of hands off. You kind of see that, actually. I mean, Biden's very, very weak, I guess you could say.
Passive.
Yeah, passive. He hasn't done anything. I mean, you have people on both sides of the spectrum, Democrat and Republican, both saying, when are you going to do something, you know? And he's basically been setting back. You know, if Trump was still in office, I don't think we would be at this stage right now, because he would have drew a hard line well ahead of time. He would have been proactive instead of reactive. And then Biden's really not even reacting. I mean, he's putting these weak sanctions in that are not going to do anything. And then he's like, oh, we'll sit back and wait a month and see what happens, see how these sanctions work out. Well, tell that to the people of Ukraine that are getting bombed and killed and, you know, sleeping in a freaking subway.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that could have been done, and we were already in place, we were, you know, independent energy-wise. We were using our own oil. We had all that set up, and that pretty well hits those places over there in the back pocket that are dealing with that oil and stuff. And now that's one thing that he could do just immediately to put the hurt on, is open that Keystone Pipeline back up and get us going back to doing what we already know we can do, because we were doing it already.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it just brings you back to the question, why the heck are we even depending on, you know, I don't know how much oil we get from Russia, but I mean, even, I don't know. Point being is that we should be more self-sufficient, like Trump had us. You know, we were seeing around $2 a gallon gas. 1 year later, we're double that. You know, it's ridiculous, and it's going to go up higher unless they do something about releasing the reserves or reopen that pipeline. You know, so day one, Biden gets in. I think he's trying to set a record for how many executive orders he could establish within the first, 24 hours or whatever. I don't know. Whether it be smart, whether it be a good decision or not, he was just issuing these things out left and right. But the first one, he cut like 70,000 jobs right off the bat from shutting that pipeline down.
Right.
So.
Yeah, there's been repeated things that's going on. And like I said, we're not political analysts or professional and all that nonsense, but we are living out here and we're dealing with it. And that's the whole point of this podcast, is we're trying to deal with the everyday folks out here and get the opinions and the mindsets of how these things are actually affecting us. We hear these media broadcasts and these politician talking heads get on the news and talk about how they're going to, they're going to help Main Street. I think I just heard that a few days ago. We're going to help. And I'm thinking he's referring to guys like me, but my street ain't got changed much since all this nonsense as far as the help goes. It's been a hindrance, it's been a hurt, and you talk about Clinton being in office and those years